Join me as we learn Chitas Chumash for the 7th for Shabbos, Parshas Yisro, the 7th Torah reading of Parshas Yisro, chapter 20, verse 15. Yesterday we learned the 10 Commandments, and as God gave the Jewish people the 10 Commandments, the first 2 that God said himself, the other 8 that Moshe said and God amplified for the Jewish people. Today, the Torah continues to tell us about the reaction of the Jewish people at the 10 Commandments. Verse 15. The Jewish people all witness God's voice, and the voices, Vesalapidim, and the flames, Veskol HaShofar, and the blast of the shofar, Vesa'or Oshen, and the mountain smoking, Vayara and the Jewish people saw it, Vayanu, and they shuddered, Vayamdu Mirachik, and they stood from a distance. Rashi, V'chol Amroim, Esakolis. What does it mean they all saw it? That nobody was blind. How do you know that nobody was mute? That they all answered, that everybody was healed. How do you know that there was nobody deaf there? Because the verse says, Nasef and Ishma we will do, and we'll hear. From here we see that everybody by Mount Sinai, by the giving of the Torah, all people from all illnesses were healed. How is it possible for them, I should say, that they heard the voices? What does it mean they saw the voices? But this was one of the miraculous events that occurred. They saw what can be heard. Was not able to hear it, see it any other place. That means they saw what was heard, which is impossible in any other place. What are the voices? From the God when he spoke. Vayanu, and they shuddered. Meaning that they shuddered, they shook, and they were taken aback by it. And they stood from a distance. What does this mean? That means they were shuddered, and because of that they were thrown back 12 mil, like the distance of their camps. And when what happened was, and then the angels would come and push them forward. So they would go back to the people that were standing in the back, and everybody was pushed back. Shenemer, as it says, that the angels would push them forward. Verse 16. And they said to Moshe, you speak with us, v'nishma, we will listen, but let not God speak with us, penamos, lest we die. Verse 17. And Moshe spoke to the people. Al tiro, don't be afraid. Do not be afraid, because God has come in order to raise you up, to make you great. So that you should have your fear, you should be imbued with the awe of Hashem al panechem on your faces, so that you should not sin. The word nasis over here means, it does not mean necessarily, it doesn't mean over here to challenge, but the word nasis comes from the word nas, like a mass. Legadil, to uplift you, eschem ba'olam in the world, sheyetz lachem shem, that people should know, bumis in the nations, shehu b'chvei de nigla lechem, that people will hear that God revealed himself to the Jewish people. God himself revealed himself to the Jewish people. The word nasis, as Rashi explains, lashna magdula, means to uplift you, to make you great. Like we see in other places in Isaiah, harimunes, alamim, lift them up over the nations, orim nisi, v'chanis alagiva, shuzokuf, which means that to stand them up tall, they should see from a distance. Because the very fact that you today saw God, if you'll be afraid, you'll have the awe of God imbued within you for now, for eternity. That you'll know that there's nothing else beyond God. Yet the people stood from a distance. While Moshe drew near through the thick cloud, Asher Sham Alikim, where God was present. Nigash al Rafal, Lifnim Shloish Mechitas, within the 3 different partitions. For example, because we mentioned before, if you look in the verse, there's 3 different partitions of how dark where God was, in the presence of God. Choshech, there was darkness, then there was an onan, then there was a cloud, varafal, then the thick cloud. Shenemer, as we learned in the book of Deuteronomy, v'hor boyer be'eshet leva shamayim, that the mountain was inflamed until the heaven, and there were 3 levels: choshech, onan, and ravel, a darkness, a cloud, and a thick cloud. Arafal u'ava onan. This arafal, what we call, is the thickness of a cloud that we learned before. Hina nechib alech ba'avanan, that I come to you in the thickness of a cloud. Verse 19. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, and God said to Moshe, Kaisemer al Bnei Yisrael, so too you should tell the Jewish people. You have seen that from the heaven I have spoken to you. Rashi, use this terminology. You have seen. There's a big difference to what people see and to what people tell you about what they have seen. Because what other people tell you, because sometimes you believe it and sometimes you don't. And therefore, you can sometimes say, maybe I never saw it. Maybe the guy's lying. What I'm seeing could be incorrect. This was before AI, that people can make up things. And one verse tells you, that God came down to Mount Sinai. A third verse says, and it says, it came from the heaven. So which one was it? In one verse it says, I spoke you from heaven. In another verse it says that God came down that God spoke to you from, God came down to Mount Sinai. So which is it? Therefore I have a third verse that comes and tells me the conclusion and makes a decision between the two of the conflicting verses. What's that it says? From heaven you heard my voice, to warn you. And on heaven, and on earth, you saw my great flame. Meaning, where was God's glory and honor? Shemayim in heaven. That means that's where you heard the voice from. But however, the great flame, the fire, the awesomeness, the strength, was on the earth. That means what the Jewish people saw was on earth. God's presence, His honor, His glory was in heaven. David Acher, another one. Shemayim U'Shmei Shemayim V'Tzion, as we mentioned earlier, Rashi said that God took the heaven and the lower parts of the heaven and spread them out like a sheet on the mountain. As it says, that God stretched out the heaven and it came then upon them. And therefore the voice that came was also from the mountain, and they were both intertwined, interlocked one with the other. Verse 20. Do not make for yourself, you should not make with me idols of silver, idols of gold. You should not make for yourself. What does this mean? Lisasun iti, what does it mean? You should not make with me. So Rashi explains, don't think that you can make images of what you saw in heaven for idolatry. Don't make such type of images, that things that help me up in heaven, so to speak, to make for your own beauty for idolatry. Elikei chesef. And this is also, even though it may not be for idolatry, but to distance themselves that it shouldn't come to idolatry. Elikei chesef. Ba lahazir ala kruvim. It's coming to warn them and tell them about the kruvim that will be on top of the ark. That you're going to make, that's going to be eventually in the Holy of Holies. Don't make them of silver. That means if you're not going to follow exactly the way God tells you to make those kruvim, then you did it wrong. Not only did you do it wrong, it's considered idolatry. So when God tells you to make the kruvim out of gold, they have to be gold and not silver. For the case of, this also comes to tell you, I saw you make 2 kruvim and not more. Don't add on to it. If you made 4, then it's as if you're making idolatry. It's as if you're making idols. Don't make it for you. Don't say that I'm going to make in our synagogues, in our holy places, I want to make it like they make in other places. No, don't even make it for you. That means don't make for you what they make in other places, even though you have other intentions. Verse 21. Mizbach Adama Tasali. The altar you shall make for me shall be directly upon the earth. V'zavachta and you'll bring on it. As a lesecha, your sacrifices, as shlomecha, and your peace offerings, as tzeincha, your sheep, as pekarecha, your cattle, b'chol hamokim asher askir ashmi. In any place that you will mention that wherever I allow my name to be mentioned, avayelecha, I will come to you, v'verechticha, and I will bless you. Verse 21, Mizbach Adama, mechuber ba'adama. Not that it's made out of earth, and have to be connected in the earth. Shalivnenu al gabi amudim. Don't build it on top of pillars. Al gabi buses or on top of a foundation. Another thing is that the actual inside of the altar they would fill with earth. That's why even in the holy temple, not only in the tabernacle would they fill the inside with earth, but even in the holy temple there was a spot that was the only place that was untiled, and the altar had to sit directly on the earth. When you build it, it has to be for my sake, meaning do not take a ready-made altar and use it as an altar. It has to be built for the purpose of a sacrifice. You'll bring sacrifices, etzloi, meaning on it. Kemoi, the olive matamenashe next to it. The yene olive mamish does have to be specifically on it. Talmud leimer. Therefore, later on in the book of Deuteronomy, it says the flesh and the blood will go directly in the altar. But the actual slaughtering was not done on the actual altar. The slaughtering was done on the side, and then they brought those flesh and blood and put it on the altar. What is it? What are you going to bring those peace offerings and burnt offerings from? They're going to be used from your sheep and your cattle and your pirush. Does this language of using meaning that those sacrifices that you're going to bring are going to be not from any type of animal that you want. It's going to have to be specifically from sheep and the cattle that I enumerate. Any place, and Rashi continues, what does it mean? Not any place where you mention my name. That I give you permission to mention my name. Shema Mefurish, God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the way it's written. I'll come there and bless you. What does it mean? I will make my divine presence there. From here we learn a very important lesson. You're not allowed to mention God's holy, pure name only in a place where the divine presence comes there. What is it? And that's in the Holy Temple. The Holy Temple was the only place one was allowed to mention God's holy name. There was the place that the Kohanim had the permission to mention God's special name. And this was done when the Kohanim would give the blessing to all the people, the Varechasam to bless the nation, and that was the only time in the blessing that they would use the Shem HaMeforish, the God's special holy name, and as well as when the holy Kohen Gadol would go into the Holy of Holies, on Yom Kippur he would also say it as well. Verse 22, but if you're going to make an altar of stones, don't build it with whose? Because you'll lift your sword on it, and that will desecrate it, will profane it. Hun stones, meaning that it shouldn't be carved out stones. What does it mean if you're going to build a stone? Rabbi Shmuel says, and this is an interesting debate that we have, when the word if, when it says im shabatayra, does that mean if you so happen to do it, or is it an obligation that that's the way you should do it? Rabbi Yishmael says, "Kol im v'im shabatayra rish esrus." That any time that the Torah says im, it's giving you permission to do it in stone, but it doesn't mean you have to do it. So v'im is b'chavanim, im zeh mashamish meloshin ka'asher. When you will build it out of stone, ka'asher tasali avanim. When you'll build an altar out of stone, Lisivnes and God says, don't use chiseled out stones. And so too in other places. Or you can learn when it will come a time when you have an obligation to build an altar of stones, that you should build your altar out of complete stones. So too when you have, if you happen to loan money to somebody, it's an obligation. If you shall do it, if you will bring it's not dependent on the will of the person. They're obligatory. That means the word if means not if you would like to do it, it's only when. So in this case, when you will do it. And not that if you have a choice, if I want to bring the mincha of the bikurim, or if I would like to do it. In these cases, the im is talking about you have an obligation to do so. As we see when it comes to building the altar of stones, it tells us, as we see later on, when it will come the time, as it says in the book of Deuteronomy, that you will build the actual altar of complete stones. So it's not if you want to, it's when you're obligated, when you will do it. So this im in this case means when. Gazis means actually carved out stones. The word gazis comes from the word geziza, cut out. That a person cuts them and carves them and hews them with different metal materials. Why? Because you lifted your sword on them and it desecrates them. This key, because maybe you'll use your sword. There may be. Maybe you'll lift your sword in it, and it desecrates it. What does it teach us? That even on a stone, which is not carved out, and you use the sword on it, then chilalta profanes it. Why is that? Because the altar is there to lengthen the life of a person. And metal, is there that shortens the life of a person. Ein zabadin. So isn't it it's not appropriate that you should use something that shortens a person's life on something that makes a person's life long. And more so. The altar is there to make peace between the Jewish people and God in heaven. Therefore, one should make sure to have respect for it. That somebody who wants to destroy and to cut should not be there. And isn't this a lesson that we can learn from? How much more so? If stones that don't see or hear and don't speak, and still in all the Torah says because they bring peace, we should not put metal on them. How much more so? If the Torah tells us how much more so when it comes to an altar, which this altar that the stones don't hear or see, and still in all the Torah says that they bring peace amongst people, how much more so? And therefore, much more so, not only does this bring peace, but it shouldn't also bring punishment. It shouldn't bring desecration. It shouldn't bring disaster amongst people as well. For that reason, there's a halach in go to Jewish law that when it comes to benching, the person should take off the knife off the table because the table is considered as a mizbeach, as an altar. Benching is considered bringing peace and also lengthens a person's life. And therefore, before we bench, we take the knives off the table as well. Verse 23, you should not go with steps on to my altar. You should not ascend to the altar with steps. Al sherli sigala or vaschalav, so that your nakedness should not be exposed over it. Rashi, when you build a ramp to the altar, don't make it steps. It should be smooth and straight. Why? Because when a person goes on steps, you need to then make big steps. You have to lengthen your steps, even though it's not revealing the nakedness literally. They were wearing pants and it was covering their nakedness. Making large steps that's close to revealing nakedness, and it's not respectful. And over here again we learn something so important from these stones. These stones, they don't have any knowledge. They don't know how somebody is going to embarrass them or not. They're stones. But the Torah says, because they're important and they're used for a holy item, don't do anything that's embarrassing. Don't do anything which is disgraceful on it. Your friend, who is in the image of God, in the image of your Creator. How much more so, you have to make sure to be careful not to embarrass him and not to do anything which is disgraceful towards your friend. This concludes the Torah reading of Parshas Yisro.